Think you know who is actually wealthy and who is struggling in 2026? Think again. Today we are redrawing the real map of financial survival. We are ranking every European nation not by dry GDP numbers, but by their actual standard of living. And yes, by popular demand from our global audience, we have included the United States, Canada, and Australia to see how they truly compare to the old continent. Our ranking uses official World Bank data to measure relative poverty, calculating the exact percentage of the population living below 60% of their nation's median income. This parameter shows how hard it is to get by in each specific society, adjusted for local costs. Who is truly trapped at the bottom and who is quietly winning? Let's find out. Welcome to Amazing Europe. Number 48. Kazakhstan. Let's start with a transcontinental country, since 14% of Kazakh territory is in the European continent. While it sits on massive oil reserves, its low statistical inequality might surprise you. Here, the relative poverty rate stands at just 7.8%. But don't let this fool you. This isn't Nordic wealth. It's a structural illusion. Decades of post-Soviet governance have left the state-owned sovereign fund Samruk Kazina dominating the market, compressing wages across a massive public sector. When everyone earns the same flat, modest salary, statistical relative poverty drops, masking a deep lack of economic mobility. It is equality, but of a highly centralized, stagnant kind. Number 47. Belarus. Moving to Belarus, we encounter a unique economic anomaly, a post-Soviet state that effectively froze time. Lukashenko's regime preserved the Soviet-style command economy, keeping nearly 70% of industry under direct state control. Officially, its relative poverty rate sits at a remarkably low 10.5%. But this number is a byproduct of state engineering. Through strict price caps on essential goods, mandatory employment policies in state-owned enterprises, and administrative wage floors, the regime artificially prevents sharp income inequality. By hoarding labor rather than allowing unemployment, Belarus flattens its income distribution. It's a tightly controlled social contract, low statistical poverty, paid for with suppressed real purchasing power and heavy reliance on Russian subsidies. Number 46. Moldova. Next is Moldova, a nation exposing the ultimate flaw of relative statistics. Globally labeled as one of Europe's poorest countries, its statistical relative poverty rate is a shocking 10.5%. But this isn't prosperity. It is a demographic exodus. Decades of economic stagnation forced over a third of Moldova's workforce to flee abroad. The massive remittances they send back act as a uniform financial cushion, artificially lifting the baseline of rural households. Coupled with a hollowed-out domestic economy dominated by low-wage agriculture, income distribution is compressed at the bottom. It is equality by default, low relative poverty because almost everyone is struggling together. Number 45. Slovenia. Slovenia transitioned from communism to capitalism without shredding its social fabric. During the 1990s, while its neighbors rushed into chaotic shock therapy privatization, Ljubljana chose a gradualist approach, retaining strong state coordination and active trade unions. Consequently, its relative poverty rate sits at a remarkably low 10.6%. The secret lies in legislative design. Slovenia boasts one of the world's highest minimum wages relative to its median income, backed by progressive taxation and a robust social safety net. By legally compressing the wage gap from the bottom up, Slovenia proved that competitive economic growth doesn't require sacrificing social equality. Number 44. Ukraine. We know that finding Ukraine in this position might surprise you, but we need to clarify some important things. The first is that the figure of 10.8% of people living in relative poverty is from 2020, so before the start of the war. Then, we must look at Ukraine's economic underbelly. For years, the country operated with a massive shadow economy, estimated at nearly 40% of GDP. Official surveys only captured declared flatline salaries, while undeclared envelope wages and widespread subsistence farming artificially compressed statistical income inequality. Legally extensive state utility subsidies propped up the poorest households. Today, the devastating war has shattered this fragile statistical equilibrium, sending actual absolute poverty soaring. Number 43, Denmark. Denmark is the undisputed masterpiece of modern socio-economic engineering. Combining hyper-competitive capitalism with unmatched social security, it boasts a relative poverty rate of just 11%. This isn't an accident. It is the result of its legendary flexicurity model. By combining flexible labor laws that allow companies to hire and fire easily with massive state-funded safety nets and retraining programs, Denmark keeps unemployment low and transition times short. Without a legally mandated minimum wage, powerful trade unions negotiate collective agreements that set a high wage floor nationwide. Funded by heavily progressive taxation, Denmark turns high taxes into a highly efficient social engine. Number 42, Ireland. Ireland presents a bizarre paradox. A hyperinflated corporate haven masking a massive domestic housing crisis. On paper, its highly redistributive tax and transfer system reduces inequality more than almost any other OECD country, keeping its relative poverty rate at 11.7%. But don't let the corporate GDP figures fool you. Ireland is the poster child for leprechaun economics, where multinational profits distort national wealth. While the state aggressively redistributes income via social welfare, it has failed on housing policy. Rents in Dublin are astronomically high, meaning that while people aren't poor on paper, their real-world purchasing power is decimated by living costs. Number 41. Armenia. Armenia is considered transcontinental because while it physically sits in Western Asia, its deep cultural, historical, and political integration makes it an inseparable part of Europe. Despite being landlocked and geopolitically isolated, its relative poverty rate sits at a moderate 12.3%. This figure, however, is a statistical shield. Decades of border blockades by Turkey and Azerbaijan restricted foreign investment, freezing the domestic economy into a flat, low-productivity state. To survive, Armenia relies heavily on its massive global diaspora, whose remittances act as a uniform financial lifeline. Coupled with widespread subsistence agriculture, the income distribution is compressed, masking a severe rural-urban divide. Number 40. Czechia. Czechia is a manufacturing powerhouse that defies the deindustrialization trend of Western Europe. With a massive automotive and engineering sector, it maintains a highly unionized, stable working class, keeping its relative poverty rate at an impressive 12.6%. The driver of this social cohesion is Czechia's record-breaking labor market, which consistently boasts the lowest unemployment rate in the entire European Union. When labor is in constant demand, wage compression occurs naturally from the bottom up. Coupled with robust state housing benefits and targeted social transfers, Czechia prevents the hollowing out of its middle class, proving that heavy industry is the ultimate shield against rising inequality. Number 39. Finland. Finland has practically written the modern playbook on eradicating extreme social exclusion. Through an uncompromising universal welfare state, it keeps its relative poverty rate at a low 12.7%. The pillar of this success is its revolutionary housing first policy. Unlike other nations that demand people secure a job before getting housing assistance, Finland provides a stable home first, then addresses unemployment and mental health. With collective bargaining covering nearly 90% of workers, there is no need for a statutory minimum wage. Unions naturally compress wage disparities. Funded by aggressive progressive taxes, Finland proves that social stability is an investment, not an expense. Number 38. Iceland. Iceland is a geographical and economic fortress against extreme wealth disparity. Despite a brutal volcanic environment and historical isolation, its relative poverty rate stands at 12.9%. The foundation of this resilience is the world's most powerful labor movement, where over 90% of workers belong to trade unions. This massive collective bargaining power enforces high baseline salaries, preventing a working poor underclass. Furthermore, after its catastrophic 2008 banking collapse, Iceland took a radical legislative path. It let the banks fail, protected citizens' deposits, and expanded the welfare state instead of imposing austerity. It is a society built on fierce communal survival, proving that crisis can reinforce equality. Number 37. The Netherlands. The Netherlands is the undisputed global champion of part-time work, but with a highly unique twist. Thanks to an economic system that guarantees equal labor rights, its relative poverty rate sits at just 12.9%. This is driven by the country's famous polder model, a consensus-based approach to policy where unions and employers cooperate. Crucially, Dutch legislation mandates that part-time employees receive the exact same hourly wage, pension benefits, and job security as full-time workers. This prevents part-time employment from becoming a poverty trap. Combined with targeted housing and healthcare allowances, the Netherlands ensures that choosing work-life balance doesn't lead to economic ruin. Number 36. Norway. Norway is famously powered by the world's largest sovereign wealth fund, yet its statistical divide is growing. With oil wealth backing its extensive welfare state, Norway's relative poverty rate is 13.2%. This slight rise in recent years exposes a structural integration paradox. Because Norway's median income is exceptionally high, the statistical threshold of relative poverty is elevated. Consequently, new immigrants, students, and low-skilled workers are easily categorized as poor on paper, despite enjoying access to world-class public infrastructure, free healthcare, and robust social safety nets. It's a golden cage of statistics. Relative poverty in Norway represents an absolute standard of living most of the world can only dream of. Number 35. Estonia. Estonia is celebrated globally as e-Estonia, the tech startup capital of Europe. But its digital miracle has a hidden dual speed. Through rapid post-Soviet liberalization and business-friendly policies, it has stabilized its relative poverty rate at 13.3%. However, this success masks a deep generational and geographic divide. While young tech workers in Tallinn thrive under a famous flat-rate income tax system, the elderly and the Russian-speaking minority in decaying industrial regions like Ida-Virumaa are left behind. With lower social spending relative to its Nordic neighbors, Estonia relies heavily on market growth rather than state redistribution to lift citizens up, creating a highly competitive yet uneven economic landscape. Number 34. Cyprus. Cyprus is a sun-drenched tax haven with a deeply fractured geopolitical reality, permanently divided since 1974. Despite a massive reliance on tourism and offshore wealth, it has managed to keep its relative poverty rate at 14%. This stability was rescued by critical legislative reforms, following its near-fatal 2013 banking crisis. The state introduced a guaranteed minimum income scheme to streamline welfare, and crucially, enacted its first statutory national minimum wage in 2023. These laws finally established a protective floor for thousands of low-paid service and hospitality workers. By curbing blatant wage exploitation, Cyprus prevents foreign capital inflows from entirely pricing out its local population. Number 33. Belgium. Belgium is a country economically split in two, divided by language and industrial history. Yet, despite deep structural divides, its national relative poverty rate is held at a resilient 14.3%. The secret to this defense is a highly controversial, legally mandated system, automatic wage indexation. Belgium is one of the only nations where wages, public salaries, and social benefits automatically rise with inflation. This prevents the working class from losing real purchasing power during economic crises. While wealthy Flanders subsidizes deindustrialized Wallonia through massive internal transfers, automatic indexation remains Belgium's ultimate legislative anchor against rising inequality. Number 32. Slovakia. Slovakia has transformed itself into the Detroit of Europe, producing more cars per capita than any other nation on Earth. This hyper-specialized manufacturing boom provides a strong floor of industrial jobs, keeping its relative poverty rate at 14.6%. However, this industrial success masks a brutal geographical division. While the capital Bratislava rivals Western Europe in wealth, Eastern Slovakia suffers from chronic underinvestment and systemic exclusion, particularly affecting the marginalized Roma population. By relying heavily on automotive foreign direct investment, Slovakia has compressed its national wage distribution, but remains highly vulnerable to global supply chain shocks and the electric vehicle transition. Number 31. Poland. Poland's explosive economic rise has reshaped Eastern Europe, but its statistical stability is driven by a massive welfare experiment. Through targeted social engineering and rapid industrial growth, Poland holds its relative poverty rate at 15.2%. The absolute turning point was the introduction of the Family 500 Plus cash transfer program, recently upgraded to 800 Plus. This massive unconditional monthly payout for children acted as a direct redistributive lift, instantly compressing the nation's lowest income brackets. However, Poland remains deeply divided between Poland A, the prosperous industrialized West, and Poland B, the agricultural, underdeveloped East. It is a modern economic miracle built on heavily subsidized social cohesion.
Number 30. Sweden.
Sweden is undergoing a quiet, system-wide unraveling. Decades of neoliberal reforms, tax cuts, and public service privatizations have pushed its relative poverty rate to 16.1%. This rise represents one of the fastest-growing inequality rates in the OECD. The driver is a structural mismatch in the labor market. Sweden's highly digitized, union-regulated economy demands highly skilled workers. This creates a brutal barrier for low-skilled immigrants, segregating them into suburban areas with high unemployment. Combined with the abolition of wealth and inheritance taxes, Sweden has evolved from an egalitarian haven into a deeply divided, dual-speed economy. Number 29. Albania. Albania is a nation still haunted by the ghosts of Enver Hoxha's brutal isolationist regime and the catastrophic 1997 pyramid scheme collapse. As it fights to modernize, its official relative poverty rate sits at 16.3%. However, this number hides a massive informal economy, estimated at over 35% of GDP. Unrecorded cash from tourism, construction, and agricultural survival networks bypasses state tax channels entirely. This underground economy distributes wealth off the books, flattening reported income inequality. Coupled with intense brain drain, where the youth emigrate to Italy or Germany, Albania's statistics are distorted by a hollowed-out labor market, propped up by cash and remittances. Number 28. Australia. By popular demand of our audience, we are also putting Australia in this ranking. While famous for mineral wealth and a high-wage lifestyle, Australia's relative poverty rate sits at a surprising 16.9%. This is driven by a toxic combination of a massive real estate bubble and stagnant welfare policies. Australia has some of the world's most overvalued housing, where astronomical rents consume over half of low-income wages. Furthermore, its primary unemployment safety net, JobSeeker, has been kept systematically low by consecutive legislative decisions, effectively trapping welfare recipients below the poverty line. Behind the mining boom lies a dual-speed economy of severe urban housing stress. Number 27. Bosnia and Herzegovina. Bosnia and Herzegovina is an economic hostage to its own political structure. Designed by the 1995 Dayton Accords to end a brutal war, its hyper-fragmented administrative system consumes over 40% of GDP and public sector salaries. This paralyzed economy leaves the official relative poverty rate at 17%. The true driver of this stagnation is institutionalized political patronage, where state jobs are allocated through ethnic political parties rather than merit. With the private sector strangled by bureaucracy, youth unemployment is rampant, driving massive immigration. The country survives on diaspora remittances and a massive informal market, which acts as a desperate, unrecorded safety net. Number 26. Hungary. Hungary's socio-economic landscape is heavily defined by the long legacy of Orbanomics, a model that prioritized workforce participation and corporate investment over traditional state welfare. By shifting from standard unemployment benefits to public work schemes, Hungary has stabilized its relative poverty rate at 17.2%. This structural framework, designed during the 16-year premiership of Viktor Orban, replaced direct financial aid with mandatory state-sponsored employment. Economically, this was paired with a 15% flat-rate income tax and Europe's highest VAT of 27% to stimulate domestic labor supply while funding corporate tax incentives. While critics highlight the tax burden on low earners, supporters credit this policy with achieving near full employment across the nation. Number 25. Portugal. Portugal is the poster child of the modern expat and tourism boom, but this golden facade conceals a bitter internal reality. As foreign capital and digital nomads flooded the country, its relative poverty rate settled at 17.2%. The driver of this divide is the mismatch between housing inflation and local salaries. While legislative schemes like the non-habitual resident tax status attracted wealthy foreigners and inflated real estate, the domestic economy remained anchored to low-wage service jobs. local young graduates face a stagnant domestic job market, forcing many to emigrate, while those remaining struggle against a cost of living heavily distorted by international tourism. Number 24, Canada. You also asked us to know Canada's position, and here it is. Despite its image as a welcoming progressive welfare state, Canada's relative poverty rate sits at 17.4%. The core of this crisis lies in its catastrophic housing bubble. Metropolitan areas like Toronto and Vancouver are severely unaffordable, driven by years of historically low interest rates and a rapid population influx that far outpaced housing supply. While federal programs like the Canada Child Benefit provide a strong cushion for families, provincial social assistance rates have stagnated. This leaves low-income renters entirely exposed to skyrocketing costs, transforming the Canadian dream into a harsh battle for shelter. Number 23, Russia. Russia is the ultimate transcontinental giant, spanning both Eastern Europe and Northern Asia, with the Ural Mountains serving as the traditional dividing line. While 77% of its landmass lies in Asia, 75% of its population resides in the European part. Its relative poverty rate stands at 17.4%. This rate is driven by a deep structural divide between wealthy metropolitan hubs like Moscow and the underfunded regional provinces. Furthermore, Russia's historically flat-rate income tax system does little to redistribute the country's massive oil and gas revenues. While natural resource wealth flows to a centralized elite, the regional working class is left with low state sector wages, cementing a dual-speed economy of vast spatial inequality. Number 22. Austria. Austria is one of Europe's wealthiest nations, yet its high-end corporate facade masks a growing structural squeeze. Despite a robust system of social partnership, its relative poverty rate sits at a surprising 17.7%. A major driver is the rise of atypical part-time jobs, known as geringfügige Beschäftigung. Under Austrian labor law, these marginal roles have lower social security contributions, trapping many workers, especially women, in low-wage cycles with minimal safety nets. Coupled with persistent inflation and high housing costs in cities like Vienna, the real purchasing power of the lower middle class has been heavily eroded, turning Austria into a dual-speed economy of hidden vulnerability. Number 21. Latvia. Latvia is a Baltic nation that embraced aggressive neoliberal reforms and fiscal austerity, but paid a heavy social price. With rapid population aging and massive youth emigration since joining the EU, its relative poverty rate sits at 17.7%. The core of this crisis lies in its pension system. Because Latvia's state pensions are calculated strictly on official lifetime tax contributions, those who worked in the massive informal sector of the chaotic 1990s now receive microscopic state payouts. Coupled with low social safety net spending and a brutal regional divide between thriving Riga and depressed rural borders like Latgale, Latvia's elderly are left exposed to a modern, high-cost economy. Number 20. Croatia. Croatia has successfully branded its stunning Adriatic coast as a global tourism paradise, but this sun-kissed success hides a fragile, highly volatile monoculture. With tourism generating nearly 20% of its GDP, Croatia's national relative poverty rate sits at 17.8%. This economic model relies heavily on seasonal, low-wage hospitality jobs, leaving a vast portion of the workforce underemployed for half the year. Furthermore, Croatia suffers from a brutal regional divide. While Zagreb and the coast thrive, inland regions like war-scarred Slavonia have been hollowed out by massive youth emigration. Faced with a high 25% VAT and weak continental welfare nets, many inland families are entirely excluded from the coastal tourism wealth. Number 19. Malta. Malta has engineered a massive economic boom by transforming into Europe's offshore playground for online gaming and financial services. While this strategy generated rapid wealth, Malta's relative poverty rate has climbed to 18.2%. This rise exposes the harsh side of a dual-speed island economy. The massive influx of high-earning foreign tech professionals has driven up the cost of living, specifically real estate and the rents. Meanwhile, local pensioners and low-skilled Maltese workers face stagnating wages, heavily suppressed by the systemic importation of cheap foreign labor from non-EU countries. As the high-income sector artificially inflates the national median, traditional Maltese are increasingly priced out of their own ancestral home. Number 18. Germany. Germany, the industrial engine of Europe, is suffering from a massive structural hollowing out of its middle class. Once praised for its economic stability, its relative poverty rate has quietly climbed to 18.3%. The blueprint for this crisis was laid in the early 2000s by the controversial Hartz labor reforms. By creating a massive deregulated mini-job sector to lower unemployment, Germany built Europe's largest low-wage trap. Now, with the collapse of its cheap Russian gas model and soaring inflation, the lower middle class is being crushed by energy costs and high rents, while capital gains remain lightly taxed. It is an economic powerhouse built on an increasingly precarious workforce. Number 17. France. France, despite spending more on social welfare than almost any other country on earth, is facing a profound systemic crisis. With deep social polarization and continuous strikes, its national relative poverty rate stands at 18.7%. This rising economic strain is deeply intertwined with severe political instability, where a permanently fractured parliament paralyzes structural reforms. Decades of deindustrialization have hollowed out northern regions and segregated suburban outer districts, which are now flashpoints for a sharp rise in crime and drug-related violence. As the middle class is crushed by inflation, the French social safety net is buckling under its own weight, turning economic despair into a volatile mix of insecurity and civil unrest. Number 16. Lithuania. Lithuania has transformed into a high-tech Baltic tiger, but its rapid economic surge has left behind a deeply fractured society. While Vilnius thrives as a leading fintech hub, the country's relative poverty rate remains stubbornly high at 18.7%. The driver of this divide is the rapid growth of the median income, which has statistically priced out the vulnerable. Because state pensions and social benefits are underfunded due to low tax-to-GDP redistribution, retirees and disabled citizens cannot keep pace with skyrocketing urban costs. This creates a brutal generational and geographic rift between wealthy young urban professionals and a struggling rural elderly population left in the shadow of Lithuania's economic miracle. Number 15. United Kingdom. The United Kingdom, historically a global financial titan, is grappling with a severe system-wide cost of living crisis. Years of stagnant real wages and welfare cuts have pushed its relative poverty rate to 18.7%. This crisis is the direct legacy of a decade of fiscal austerity and aggressive social reforms, such as the introduction of universal credit. Crucially, the explosion of precarious zero-hour contracts has generated widespread in-work poverty, where employment no longer guarantees financial security. Combined with skyrocketing private rents and a brutal north-south regional divide, the British social safety net has eroded, leaving millions of working families exposed. Number 14. Switzerland. Switzerland is renowned as a global sanctuary of banking and extreme wealth, but its perfection hides a brutal, high-cost reality. Because Swiss median income is astronomically high, its relative poverty rate sits at a shocking 18.8%. This isn't absolute deprivation, but a systemic squeeze caused by mandatory living costs. Under Swiss law, healthcare is privatized. Citizens must pay expensive mandatory monthly premiums out of pocket, which acts as a heavy regressive tax. Coupled with the world's most expensive childcare systems and a rental market where home ownership is a luxury, low-earning Swiss families are systematically pushed below the relative threshold, priced out of their own high-wealth nation. Number 13. Georgia. Georgia is considered transcontinental because it spans the exact geopolitical border between Eastern Europe and Western Asia, with the high peaks of the Greater Caucasus Mountains forming the physical dividing line. Despite aggressive free market reforms and a booming capital city, its relative poverty rate sits at 19.2%. This stubborn inequality is a direct consequence of a massive domestic rift. While the post-Soviet libertarian reforms of the 2000s slashed bureaucracy and boosted urban tourism, they also dismantled social safety nets. Today, nearly 40% of the workforce remains trapped in low-productivity, subsistence agriculture, leaving rural communities economically isolated and unable to access Tbilisi's modern wealth. Number 12. Greece. Greece is a nation still deeply scarred by the economic equivalent of a world war. Over a decade after the devastating sovereign debt crisis and the brutal Troika-imposed austerity bailouts, its relative poverty rate sits at 19.4%. This stubborn figure is the legacy of catastrophic spending cuts. To secure international funds, Athens was forced to slash pensions, freeze wages, and gut public health care, permanently damaging its middle class. While the tourism sector has roared back, it offers mostly seasonal, low-wage jobs. Faced with high indirect taxes and massive brain drain, Greece struggles to translate GDP growth into real, stable wages for its working class. Number 11. Romania. Romania is home to one of the most extreme socio-economic divides in the European Union. While Bucharest has transformed into a high-tech IT hub, the national relative poverty rate is stuck at 20.1%. This stubborn figure is driven by a massive, untouched rural-urban divide. Nearly 45% of Romanians live in rural areas, where millions still rely on low-productivity subsistence agriculture and lack basic running water. Worse, Romania's 10% flat tax system does almost nothing to redistribute urban tech wealth to these neglected villages. Combined with massive immigration that hollowed out the working-age population, rural Romania remains trapped in a different century. Number 10. Luxembourg. Luxembourg is the wealthiest nation in the European Union by GDP per capita, yet it sits deep in our poverty ranking. Because its national median income is astronomically high, its relative poverty rate stands at a staggering 20.5%. This isn't absolute starvation, it is a brutal housing crisis. Astronomical real estate prices, driven by tax haven banking wealth and land hoarding, have made renting inside the country virtually impossible for average workers. While Luxembourg boasts the EU's highest minimum wage, the extreme cost of shelter means local service sector residents are severely priced out, creating a highly gilded society where even a high nominal wage is not enough to survive. Number 9. Serbia. Serbia is an industrial hub still recovering from the economic devastation of the 1990s wars, sanctions, and NATO bombings. To rebuild, Belgrade chose an economic model based on subsidizing foreign corporations to set up cheap manufacturing, leaving its relative poverty rate at a high 20.5%. This strategy created jobs, but they are low-wage, high-stress assembly positions. The result is a stark regional divide. While Belgrade's modern IT and service sectors thrive, the southern and eastern rural regions remain deeply deindustrialized and impoverished. Stuck with flat labor taxes and pro-employer regulations, the Serbian working class is locked into a low-cost production trap. Number 8. Bulgaria. Bulgaria is trapped in a demographic death spiral, having lost nearly a third of its population to youth emigration since the fall of communism. Its relative poverty rate sits at a staggering 20.6%. This crisis is cemented by a strict, low redistribution tax system. Bulgaria maintains a 10% flat tax, the lowest in the EU, which successfully attracts tech outsourcing to Sofia but leaves the state budget with virtually no resources for social safety nets. Consequently, millions of elderly pensioners in the hollowed-out rural northwest live on microscopic pensions, completely isolated from the country's modern urban wealth. Number 7. Spain. Spain is celebrated for its rich culture and relaxed lifestyle, but beneath the surface lies one of Europe's most dysfunctional labor markets. Trapped by structurally high unemployment, Spain's relative poverty rate sits at a persistent 21%. The core of this crisis is a deeply fractured dual labor market. While older workers enjoy heavily protected permanent contracts, younger generations are locked into highly precarious temporary contracts, cycling constantly between short-term jobs and unemployment. This structural volatility, combined with deep regional divides between the industrial north and the agrarian, low-income south, keeps millions of Spanish families permanently categorized as the working poor. Number 6. Italy. Italy is the only OECD nation where real wages have actually decreased since 1990, locked in a decades-long productivity stagnation. Squeezed by high taxes on labor and a market dominated by low-productivity microenterprises, its relative poverty rate stands at 21.2%. This crisis is structurally divided by the historic Mezzogiorno divide, where youth employment in the south remains chronically low. In the absence of a strong state-funded social floor, Italy relies heavily on a family-based welfare model, where retirees' pensions historically subsidized younger, unemployed family members. Today, as inflation rises and pension values erode, this private safety net is collapsing, leaving millions of working-class families with no buffer. Number 5. Montenegro. Montenegro is a stunning Adriatic jewel, but its postcard-perfect coastline hides a deep, structural monetary trap. Despite a massive influx of luxury foreign real estate investment, its relative poverty rate stands at 22.7%. A major driver is the country's unilateral adoption of the euro, which deprives its central bank of monetary tools. Fully exposed to imported European inflation without Eurozone safety nets, the mountainous northern regions suffer from severe deindustrialization and zero economic opportunity. As wealthy expats inflate living costs on the coast, the rural north is completely priced out, trapped in a highly skewed dual-speed economy. Number 4. Turkey. Turkey is a transcontinental powerhouse, physically divided between Europe and Asia by the Bosporus and Dardanelles Straits, with Istanbul bridging both continents. But behind its vital geopolitical role, its relative poverty rate has surged to a devastating 23.7%. This crisis is the direct result of years of highly unorthodox monetary policies, where cutting interest rates amidst soaring inflation caused the Turkish lira to collapse. The resulting hyperinflation completely wiped out the real purchasing power of the working class. Compounded by a massive informal labor market and the hosting of millions of refugees, local wages have been severely suppressed, creating a brutal economic divide. Number 3. North Macedonia. North Macedonia is a landlocked Balkan nation whose development was paralyzed for decades by geopolitical disputes. Its relative poverty rate sits at a staggering 24.4%. The core of this inequality is a combination of massive youth emigration and a flawed foreign investment model. Skopje implemented a 10% flat tax to lure international factories into its free economic zones. While this lowered official unemployment, it trapped the workforce in low-wage, low-skilled assembly roles. Underfunded by flat tax revenues, the state's safety net remains practically non-existent, leaving vulnerable rural communities completely exposed. Number 2. United States. Many of you asked us to know the position of the United States, and unfortunately, it is not a good position. Despite being the world's ultimate economic superpower, the relative poverty rate in the US stands at a staggering 25.9%. This crisis is driven by the structural fragmentation of its safety net. Unlike Europe, the US has no universal health care, making medical debt a leading driver of financial ruin. According to a landmark study published in the American Journal of Public Health, about 530,000 families file for bankruptcy every year due to medical bills, meaning that medical issues are linked to 66.5% of all personal bankruptcies in the country. Coupled with a federal minimum wage frozen since 2009 and the rise of precarious gig work, millions of employed Americans are trapped in working poverty, priced out of essential housing and childcare. Before we reveal the European nation with the highest relative poverty rate, if you found this analysis valuable, please support our project by hitting the like button, subscribing, and turning on the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming videos. And since we've touched on economic disparities throughout this ranking, if you want us to map every European country by the actual gap between the rich and the poor, type Europe in the comments below. Number 1. Kosovo. Kosovo sits at the top of our ranking, a nation whose very existence remains a geopolitical battlefield. Declared independent in 2008, but unrecognized by many global powers, its relative poverty rate peaks at a devastating 26.9%. The driver of this severe division is its massive reliance on diaspora remittances. While money sent from Switzerland and Germany inflates the national median income, it creates a brutal, dual-speed society. Citizens without foreign family support are completely priced out by imported inflation, surviving in a domestic market with stagnant local wages and rampant youth unemployment. Locked out of international investment due to its disputed status, Kosovo remains a country economically severed in two. So what is the common thread that separates the winners from the losers on this map? It isn't raw GDP, but legislative design. The nations with the lowest relative poverty share three pillars: highly progressive taxation, powerful labor unions that compress wage gaps, and universal safety nets like housing and healthcare. Conversely, the countries trapped at the top rely on regressive tax structures, deregulated labor, and privatized essential costs. Poverty is not an inevitable natural disaster. It is a policy choice. Just a reminder, if you want to see our full ranking of European countries by income inequality, type Europe in the comments. To get an even deeper understanding of our continent's economic landscape, we highly recommend clicking on the video to your right, where we've ranked every European nation by the real purchasing power of its citizens. That's all for today. See you next time.